IHMS. This is an aperiodic English program presenting contributions from Friends of Harar. Since the inception of the International Harari Media Services, or also known as IHMS, a number of non-Harari Ethiopians and alike have shown relentless support for Harari causes. They believe and insist that Harar is their motherland. They have demanded at various forums to have their voices heard in support of minorities in Ethiopia, and in particular for Hararis. Reaffirming Harar as a city of peace, unity, solidarity, and coexistence, IHMS has created an English program for these spectrum of friends of Harar to add their voices and presentations, as well as to be heard openly. They are the voice of reason as independent agents with an eye open for others. Therefore, this is their program, and today we have the following episode for you written by a dear friend of Harar. Outsourced Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity and Abiy's Synergy as Political Deformation in Ethiopia, written by a friend of Harar, narrated by Iman Jami. Across circumstances and areas, Ethiopia's minorities do share one common characteristic. For almost 2 centuries, that characteristic is social, economic, or political marginalization or systematic assimilation. In recognition of this fact, and a century and a half of contagious struggles brought down by Imperial Milenik and its predecessor Haile Selassie regime in 1974, these repressive regimes were dismantled to their core for the good of the majority and liberated over 80 minority social groups in Ethiopia. It feels like uprooting a systematic tribal apartheid. Following the ever-confused politics of Ethiopia, I would like to shed light on some issues and provide some evidence on how Orthodox Christianity was outsourced, not homegrown, and gouging Abiy Ahmed's deformed political move and direction in today's Ethiopia. In spite of some human rights abuses, embezzlement of government finances, corruption, and dominance of a single tribe government in the last 27 years, the dismantling of the old imperial regime and diminishing the dominance of a single ethnic group brought a sense of equity and equality amongst the diverse people, as well as reaffirmation of Ethiopianness, not Ahmadization. These liberations have consolidated minority rights, enhanced cultural and traditional identities, thereby reinforcing the use of their indigenous language throughout the country. The federal constitution was a bold experiment that had justified itself as a roadmap for minorities at large. It was a question answered in paving a way of self-preservation for the minorities and the Oromos. Mind you, without the recognition of the 82-plus social groups and accepting each and every ethnic group as indigenous people, there is no united Ethiopia. These social groups are the DNA, the fabric or building block of Ethiopia. To equitably live in today's Ethiopia, regardless of the numbers, the size, the shapes, and the forms of each social group, one must respect the existence of each ethnic group with its diverse identities, including religious rights and equality. A viable government upholds the Constitution and implements rules of law that fight against discrimination and uses humanity at its core. Talking about the coming of Christianity and Islam into Ethiopia, both religions were introduced by the native Abyssinians, not the Arabs. No contempt of Arabs anymore. It is suffice to refer to the Law of Kings documents, which is a collection of laws originally written in Arabic by the Coptic Egyptian writer Abdul Fadil ibn al-Asal when Cyril III was a patriarch of Alexandria. It was introduced into so-called northwest Abyssinia during the reign of King Zara Yaqub to relieve him from the sadness and depression as reported in the document itself. This document later became the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahido Church Constitution, or Faith and Order document, translated from Arabic to Ge'ez by Petros, the son of Abdi Said. This is suffice to imply that Islam had reached the eastern and southern part of today's Ethiopia way before the arrival of the Coptic Christians south of Gondar territories. The establishment of Harar as an Islamic knowledge center, verifying Harar's civilization way before the advent of the civilization of Gondar, spreading to the rest of the sultanates of Ethiopia. Similarly, Islam was also introduced into northeastern Abyssinia as Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ordered Muslims in seeking protection from infidels of Mecca. Evidently, none of the religions were homegrown, but imports from Alexandria in Egypt and Mecca in Saudi Arabia. It is obvious that today's Orthodox Christians and Muslims are descendants of converts and reverted indigenous Abyssinians or Emiratis of Ethiopia. These historical facts would easily bust the misconception and misinformation rampantly spreading among Ethiopian Orthodox followers that Muslims are immigrants. We are all indigenous Habasha or Abyssinians, and lately known as Ethiopians. Mind you, ignorance and misinformation often lead to very expensive human and material destructions, as seen in Mota town in Gojam. These inhumane destructions in both Mota town and Harar were the results of organized propaganda, extreme Orthodox Christians, and activities of remnants of imperial guards. In the most strongest terms, the Muslims and the true Ethiopians all condemned the unwarranted devastation of Muslim properties and mosques in both places. This must not repeat itself anywhere in Ethiopia. Coming to my second point, Abiy Ahmed's synergy philosophy, if it is at all a healthy philosophy, is a doctrine of forceful assimilation in reshaping and reviving the whole repression of the past imperial regimes, as well as reject the renaissance of the diverse people of Ethiopia from self-governance, self-determination, and independence. It appears that Abiy has proposed a constitutional amendment that deforms the diverse people of Ethiopia and relinquishes their rights of developing their identities and language. It is simply reinstating dominance in his philosophy appears to be an old colonial British one. If you dismantle the language, you can immediately dismantle the fabric of a social group and hence control them and their resources eventually. For example, let's look at how the proposed constitutional amendment attempts to discourage the use and the development of minority languages in their own territories. And it also suggests to reinstate the plain green, yellow, red flag. Mr. Prime Minister, do you know that the plain green, yellow, and red flag is a symbol of feudalism, repression, oppression, exploitation, forceful marginalization, and assimilation for almost all ethnic groups in Ethiopia? Did you know that it's a flagship of dominance of one religion over the other? This is how much your synergy philosophy is demented in advocating the bygone eras and bringing back the painful past for all the minorities and the Oromos at large. Another example is to look at the imperial constitution that has clearly created suffering and pain amongst a large segment of its population in the last century. Deep-rooted discriminatory documents that were developed and used as the rights of Ahmara and Ethiopian Orthodox Christians over others. Referring to these documents, listen to this. How the imperial constitution discriminated when serving various ethnic and faith groups in imperial public services of imperial Ethiopia. It clearly says, we must first serve Ahmara Orthodox Christians. Second, non-Ahmara Orthodox Christians. Third, Ahmara Catholic Christians. Fourth, non-Ahmara Catholic Christians. Fifth, Ahmara and other Christian faiths. Sixth, non-Ahmara and other Christian faiths. And lastly, we must serve the Muslims. Now, how offensive and inhumane were these? Believe it or not, these were part of the imperial rule and law that were dismantled in 1974 to bring peace to the majority. Conscious of the social injustices committed in the last 150 years, Abiy Ahmed's political advisors and entourages are increasingly nervous about their future. They are contradicting the current national constitution and international laws. The future of Ethiopia is not the reformation of its past regimes, nor is it ignoring international agreements and laws. Ethiopia has a spectrum of laws, policies, and constitutional provisions agreed upon by the majority social groups, aimed at protecting the minority social groups and upholding a number of international legal agreements. To mention a few, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which was established in 2007, and the ILO Conventions of Indigenous and Tribal People, which was established in 1989. The synergy philosophy is hostile to such conventions, and his political advisors and remnants of imperial mindsets misleading the head of state into an illusion of becoming King Prime Minister of Ethiopia. This dangerous conspiracy and political move must now be stopped for good, or the country will come together and become ungovernable. Listen to the people of Ethiopia, the minorities, the Muslims, and the Oromos at large, who are the victims of imperial Ethiopia for centuries, based on the partial restorations of their dignity, rights, and equity since 1992. They are again voicing to have full rights and peaceful coexistence in today's Ethiopia. As observed recently, omitting the large segment of the population is either vying for total destruction or genocide. Respect humanity, and I wish you nothing but peace. IHMS